The first time he saw her, she was scolding a pigeon like it owed her money. No one else on the sidewalk gave it a second glance, just another older woman in a sharp, beige coat, pausing on the edge of the busy plaza as the early October light softened the edges of everything it touched. Her face held that kind of precision that comes from years of quietly carving away what doesn't work. Yet, here she was, standing next to a tipped-over coffee cup, waving one gloved hand at a bird and saying, "You're not better than me just because you can fly, you smug bastard." He stopped walking. That stopped him. Maybe it was the voice. It had that dry, cut-glass tone that people learn over time, like good scotch. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit her jaw, catching every fine line she didn't try to hide. But mostly, it was that she looked alive. Not in the fake, yoga-stretched, collagen-pumped way. No. She looked like someone who had stopped trying to be perfect and was finally interesting again. He didn't speak to her that day. He just watched her walk off muttering to herself, her heels echoing like a challenge on the stone tiles. He felt the stupid urge to run after her and say something, anything, but what would he have said? That she was the most real thing he'd seen in months? That a pigeon brought her to life in a way no one his age could manage with all their curated social feeds and weekend hikes? The next time was inside the university gallery where he worked part-time. She was standing in front of a charcoal piece by a sophomore with talent and trauma and too much caffeine in his system. She was frowning, not at the art, but at herself, like she'd walked into the wrong part of her past and couldn't find the door out. He walked up beside her without thinking, not sure what his plan was, but knowing he needed to be near her again. "People always look like they're drowning in this one," he said, gesturing to the sketch, "but I think the artist just hates bathtubs." She looked at him like he'd interrupted a monologue. Then, slowly, her mouth twisted, not into a smile, not yet, but something that suggested she might consider it under the right conditions. "I hate bathtubs too," she said. "They ask you to be still when everything inside you is still screaming." He didn't expect that. Most people pretended to find it moving or visceral or some other word they'd picked up from a TED Talk. But not her. She was in it. Maybe she had drowned, once. "So," he said, unsure how far he could push, "what's screaming inside you today?" She turned her head toward him and raised an eyebrow with surgical precision. "Do you usually ask strangers about their inner chaos?" He shrugged. "Only when they look like they might answer." That earned it, the smile. Slow, reluctant, like a cat emerging from a warm engine. Her lips didn't part, but her eyes crinkled, and something invisible inside her seemed to unclench. It wasn't the forced kind of smile women sometimes give to avoid being followed. This was honest. It hit him like a song he didn't know he missed. They didn't exchange names. She drifted away after a few more minutes, leaving him with that stupid, giddy ache that you get when you know something important has just happened and you're not quite ready to admit it. He told himself he was imagining things. That she was just someone interesting and older and gone. But when she returned the next week, same heels, different coat, and walked right past the same charcoal drawing to stand before a self-portrait with blurred edges and burned corners, he knew he wasn't imagining anything. "I thought you hated bathtubs," he said behind her. She smiled without looking at him. "I like ghosts even less." He stepped beside her, close enough to smell the faint citrus of her perfume. "So, what are you doing here again?" She tilted her head, as if the question had missed something obvious. "I wanted to see if you'd be here." His stomach flipped. She wasn't playing it cool. She wasn't playing anything at all. She was direct, like someone who didn't have time to waste on pretense. That was the beginning. No numbers. No names. Just two people meeting at the same place, the same time, again and again, until habits became ritual and silence became intimacy. He found out later she was 43, that she lived 3 blocks from the gallery, that she used to work in publishing before her marriage imploded and left her with a townhouse full of books she couldn't quite throw away. He was 24. Finishing grad school. Working at the gallery to keep his schedule flexible. Parents still alive but emotionally distant. One long-term ex-girlfriend who had tried to mold him into her LinkedIn dream version of a man and left when he didn't fit. Their worlds didn't match. But something inside them did. The moment it all shifted came on a cold Thursday when she showed up with red-rimmed eyes, her coat misbuttoned, and stood in front of a sculpture she normally hated. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just handed her a thermos of tea and sat down on the bench next to her. After 10 minutes of silence, she reached out, curled her fingers around his, and squeezed. It was a quiet gesture. No fireworks. No confessions. Just warmth in the space between their palms, the kind that said, "I'm here, and I see you, and I know you don't want to talk about it yet." She didn't say thank you. But when she looked at him again, the smile that crossed her face wasn't small or reluctant or half alive. It was real. The first real one in years. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying and beautiful at once: he was already too far in. She began texting him. Not often, never after midnight, and always with punctuation so precise it looked like someone who'd once edited manuscripts for a living. But it meant she was letting him in. She'd write things like "saw a woman today with a leash on her child and a phone on her husband." Modern romance. Or reminder, the world is ridiculous and you are not. His replies were Messier fragments, memes, snapshots of street graffiti, but she laughed at all of them, sometimes typing out the word instead of just using an emoji, like she wanted him to see her mouth saying it. They started meeting in the sculpture garden behind the library. He'd pretend to sketch while she read on a bench with oversized sunglasses and coffee she always claimed was terrible but kept buying anyway. He never called her beautiful. She never asked if this was serious. It worked, in that fragile, stolen kind of way. But secrets are never light. They pile in silence. He didn't tell anyone. Not his roommate Theo, not his best friend Samira, not even his ex when she tried to drunkenly flirt with him at a Halloween party and asked, "So who is she, this mystery woman that made you a ghost?" He just smiled and shrugged, and Samira later said, "You're glowing like a man who's either in love or in way over his head." He said nothing. Because how could he explain it? Her name was Miriam, he finally learned, was everything his world had taught him to avoid. She was divorced, once rich, now self-sufficient. She had a son in college in another state, a sharp memory, and no tolerance for performance. She didn't chase dreams. She confronted them. And yet he needed her. Not in the desperate way young men sometimes chase older women for validation or fantasy, but in a quieter, more insidious way. He needed how her presence slowed time. How her gaze cut through him like she already knew all the worst parts and hadn't flinched. Still, the world outside didn't care about the inner shape of love. It cared about appearances. The rumors started slow. It began with a girl in his media ethics seminar who glanced at his phone one afternoon and saw a message flash from Miriam G. She whispered something to her friend, who told another, and by the end of the week, someone had posted a blurry photo of them in the sculpture garden with the caption, "Cougar season in full swing." The post was taken down after a day, but the damage stuck like oil on fabric. Friends started talking softer around him. A professor made a May-December romance joke during office hours and then pretended it hadn't happened. Someone from the student newspaper messaged him, fishing for quotes about non-traditional relationships in academic settings. He didn't reply. When he finally told her, Miriam didn't get angry. She got still. "So, they'd noticed," she said quietly, setting down her glass. It was only a matter of time. He sat across from her in her living room, where everything was clean but nothing was trendy. The kind of home people who've stopped trying to impress tend to create intentional, grounded. "I can handle it," he said. She gave him a look he would later learn to dread, the kind you give someone younger who still believes fairness is part of the equation. "I know you can. But I've been down this hallway before. People don't like when women my age stop apologizing for wanting things." He leaned forward. "So what do we do?" She didn't answer right away. Just stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with an envelope old-fashioned, cream-colored, unsealed. She handed it to him. Inside was a letter. Neatly typed. Short. Specific. It was from her ex-husband's attorney. A reminder, it said, that certain public displays of behavior could affect her spousal agreement, and that her reputation, especially as a mother, was still a point of interest should custody be revisited, despite their son being legally an adult. He read it twice, his jaw tightening. This is blackmail. It's legalese soaked in judgment. Same thing. He looked up. So we just hide forever? I'm not asking you to hide, she said, and her voice had that low, commanding power that sometimes made him forget how young he really was. I'm asking you to wait. Let the smoke clear. We decide on our terms, not theirs. But he didn't want to wait. Not because of ego, or pride, or some juvenile obsession with being seen. He wanted to stand beside her without shame. Because shame didn't belong in what they had. And still, it had crept in, hadn't it? That night, as she slept on his chest in her bed, he stared at the ceiling, realizing something awful. Love, when threatened, asks questions no one's ready for. Like, what are you willing to risk for this? Or when does love start to feel like trespassing? And just before dawn, his phone rang. An unknown number. He answered groggily. A pause. Then a woman's voice, calm, clipped, unfamiliar. If you care about Miriam, you'll stop this before it gets worse. Click. No name. No threat. Just that. Enough to poison the air between them for days. They stopped meeting in public. Not because they wanted to, but because caution slowly replaced spontaneity. The library garden became too visible, the gallery felt like a spotlight, and even his apartment, where once she'd sat with her knees tucked under her, reading his thesis drafts while sipping instant coffee like it was wine, started to feel like a risk. So they moved underground. Not literally, of course. But that's what it felt like. He started using an app with disappearing messages. She picked him up 3 blocks away from campus in a car with tinted windows. They'd meet at quiet parks on the edge of the city or hole-in-the-wall cafes where the music was always just loud enough to blur their words. There was no drama in it, no cloak and dagger. Just the slow, steady tightening of the walls around them. And in that tightness, something strange happened. They grew closer. Maybe it was because everything now required intention. No casual meetups. No careless moments. Every word, every glance, had to be chosen with care. At night, they'd lie awake in her bed, sharing pieces of themselves like children sneaking candy past curfew. He told her about his father's silence, the kind that clung to the corners of their house growing up, or "I'm proud of you" was a phrase he only heard secondhand from other people. She told him about the time her son stopped calling her mom and started calling her Miriam after the divorce, like he needed to redraw the boundary for his own survival. He told her how he always felt too young to lead and too old to follow. She told him how every time she entered a room full of men her age, they looked through her like she was made of glass. Sometimes they'd just lie there and breathe. That, too, became a kind of truth. I forget how old you are when you talk like this, he said one night, watching the way her fingers toyed with the edge of the blanket. And I forget how young you are when you listen like that, she whispered back. It was never about pretending their age gap didn't exist. It was about building something in the middle of it. A bridge, not a mask. Still, the world doesn't like bridges. It likes fences. Labels. Gossip. And gossip returned, louder now. Someone claimed they saw her in the art department late at night. Another swore they recognized her car parked near the student apartments. A classmate casually asked him if he was still sleeping with the widow, which made no sense at all until he realized Miriam's ex-husband had posted cryptic things on social media about being abandoned and mourning the loss of trust. It all would have stayed background noise if not for that one night. They were walking back to her car after dinner at a Thai place out near the industrial district. The streets were empty, the kind of dead silent that only happens around midnight when even the street lamps look bored. They weren't holding hands. They never did in public. But their bodies leaned close, brushing shoulders as they talked, softly, about nothing, about everything. That's when they heard it. A camera click. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Obvious. Not the phone camera kind, but the mechanical snap of a real one, a DSLR, probably, the kind used by people who wanted proof, not art. He spun, heart pounding, but whoever it was had already ducked into the shadows. A figure vanished behind the dumpsters near the alley. A car engine started 2 blocks down. Too far to chase. Too real to ignore. Miriam froze, then inhaled once, sharply. Her face was blank, but her fists were tight. "Someone followed us," he said, stupidly, like she hadn't noticed. She nodded once, then unlocked the car and got in. They didn't speak until they were back at her place. Inside, she paced the length of the living room, arms folded, her hair falling loose from its clip like it couldn't stand the tension either. He just stood near the wall, waiting. "I told you," she said finally. "I told you it would come to this." "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, but it sounded weak, even to him. She turned. "It doesn't matter. Truth has never stopped people from writing better lies." He stepped forward. "Then let them. We'll deal with it. Together." But she looked at him, then really looked, and in her eyes was something ancient and tender and tired. "I don't know if you understand yet," she said, softly. "I've fought this war before. And I lost things I'm still grieving." He opened his mouth, but she shook her head. "You're not the one they'll call names. You're not the one who'll be accused of using someone. You're not the one whose worth has a shelf life in this culture." Silence. Then, more quietly, "You're not the one who'll lose their child again." He moved to her, then pulled her into his arms. She resisted for half a second, then melted. Her breath was shaky against his shoulder. His hands were steady. They didn't talk the rest of the night. But when they finally slept, her body was curved against his like she'd been trying to remember how it felt to be safe. But safety is an illusion when someone else knows the truth. And somewhere out there, a stranger held a photo of them that could shatter the quiet world they'd built. The photograph appeared in an alumni newsletter. Buried near the back, in the Community Spotlights section. A casual mention: Miriam Gaines, former editor-in-chief at Greyline Books and current patron of the local Arts Council, seen attending an exhibit near campus. Pictured here, sharing a quiet evening with a university artist. There was no caption naming him. No direct accusation. Just a grainy but unmistakable image, Miriam's face half lit by a street lamp, his posture angled toward her like gravity itself was pulling him in. Their proximity spoke louder than touch. The moment had clearly been chosen for effect. The fallout was immediate. By midweek, his advisor called him in just to chat. The department chair followed with a non-disciplinary conversation. The tone was always polite. The questions, less so. Was she influencing his work? Was this appropriate? Was he safe? He kept his answers short and cold. No, yes. Miriam, meanwhile, vanished. Not entirely, but from his life, she went quiet. Her text stopped. The call she used to answer in one ring now went to voicemail. The gallery stopped receiving her anonymous donations. When he dropped by her townhouse, the lights were off even though her car was out front. He felt like the air had been knocked out of him. Finally, after 4 days, he received a message. A single line. "I need time. Not because I don't want this, but because they've made it harder to keep anything beautiful." He didn't reply. Not because he was angry. But because he understood. They'd made her a spectacle. Turned what they had into a caricature of lust and midlife crisis. And still, he couldn't stop loving her. That was the cruelest part. Then came the conference. A student-organized academic showcase. He'd been scheduled to present a multimedia piece on intimacy and anonymity in digital spaces. It had been on the books for months. Miriam had helped him conceptualize it, late night sketching outlines on napkins, laughing at how art could expose and protect in equal measure. He considered canceling. But that felt like surrender. So he didn't. The event was held in a hall with too many mirrors and not enough warmth. People filed in with name tags and tablets, whispering to each other like they were all secretly judging someone else. He stepped onto the small stage with dry lips and a hard spine. He spoke clearly, played the recorded voices, showed the fragmented portraits, projected anonymous confessions of strangers collected over the semester. The audience responded well. Nods, smiles, a few thoughtful glances. And then the final slide came up. It was her. Not the photo from the newsletter, but one he'd taken in secret during one of their nights reading by the fireplace. Her hair was messy, her glasses tilted slightly, and her mouth mid-laugh unguarded, open, real. He didn't caption it. He just let the image hang there. This, he said finally, is not about romance. It's about seeing someone when they believe no one sees them. And what it costs to keep that vision alive when the world insists on calling it wrong. Silence. And then, a voice. Familiar. Clear. Anchored. I see you. He turned. She stood near the back of the room. No makeup. No mask. Her gray coat open over a simple black dress. Her hair pulled back like she had nothing left to hide. Gasps rustled. Someone dropped a cup. All eyes turned. But Miriam stepped forward, calmly, like this moment had always belonged to her. She walked up the aisle without flinching, until she stood beside him. Then, turning to face the room, she spoke. I'm not ashamed of loving someone who reminds me what it's like to be curious again. Who listens? Who challenges me without needing to win? And if the story you're writing about us is different, that's your failure. Not mine. No one interrupted her. No one dared. She looked at him. Not a smile. Not a kiss. Just that look, the one that says, even if this ends, I meant it. And then she left. No drama. No curtain. Just a truth laid bare. He finished the presentation in a daze. People clapped politely. Some avoided his gaze. Others looked inspired. A few looked afraid. Afterward, Samira found him in the hallway. You knew what that would cost her, she said. I know, he replied. And you let her do it anyway? No, he said. She chose to. Samira didn't say anything more. Just touched his shoulder gently. For what it's worth, she said, that was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time. He nodded. But inside, he wasn't sure if bravery would be enough. A month passed. She didn't return his messages. Not the long ones where he poured himself out like a confession, not the short ones where all he could manage was still thinking about you. No calls. No letters. No carefully worded texts with sharp wit and wry warmth. She had folded herself back into the life she once kept apart from him. And maybe that was the right thing. Or maybe it was just what survival looked like. The city moved on. Gossip burned out the way gossip always does, aloud, then tired. His advisor softened again. The department forgot. The paper published another scandal, this time about misallocated research funds, and the crowd moved on to fresher meat. He kept his head down. Graduated. Declined a job offer in another state. Stayed where the air still held traces of her perfume. He sometimes walked past her townhouse. Never stopped. Never knocked. Just kept walking, as if passing the address was enough to feel tethered to something that had once lit up every quiet room inside him. Until one day, a letter arrived. Real paper. Her handwriting. The return address missing. Inside was a single page. Dear you. No names. Too many ghosts already. I waited to write this until the ache dulled enough that I could finish a sentence without reopening something tender. You once asked me what I was afraid of. I didn't answer honestly. The truth is, I wasn't afraid of the rumors, or my ex, or even losing my reputation. I've already lost enough things to know I can survive that. What terrified me was how alive I felt with you. Because it made me realize how much of my life had been spent asleep at the wheel. And waking up next to you meant I'd have to admit just how much time I'd wasted pretending I didn't want to be seen. You made me feel something no one had touched in years. You reminded me that I wasn't done, that I was still capable of surprise, of softness, of longing that didn't taste like compromise. But here's the hardest part: I don't know if love is always meant to survive. Sometimes, I think its purpose is simply to interrupt the monotony, to give us one true thing before the noise resumes. I want you to know that you were that true thing. My one honest spark in a world built on performance. If I saw you again, I'm afraid I'd stay. And if I stayed, I might start demanding things from the world again. Things I'd made peace with losing. So I'm leaving it here. With this letter. Because endings, if done right, can be their own kind of beginning. Just not the one we hoped for. Wherever you go, please don't fold yourself small to fit into someone else's shape. You were made for rooms with windows, not boxes with locks. Thank you for waking me up. Thank you for letting me matter. M. He read it 5 times before setting it down. And then he didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat on the floor of his apartment and felt the full weight of what it meant to love someone who'd been brave enough to walk away, not because it didn't matter, but because it did. He started writing again. Really writing. Essays. Stories. Poems that didn't rhyme. He wrote about the spaces between people. About timing. About the shape of touch in a world that judges intimacy by age or income or proximity to power. And once, at a conference in another city, a woman approached him after a reading. Early 40s. Clear eyes. Same perfume. Not her. But for a second, the air shimmered. Your words, the woman said, they feel like someone survived something without bitterness. He smiled. Not forced. Not bitter. Just real. Someone did, he said. He never found out who took the photo. He never heard from her again. He never stopped carrying the question, if we had met 5 years earlier or 10 years later, would we have lasted? But he knew the answer didn't matter. Because love had already done what it came to do. It made them both alive again.